After all you've been through, I just didn't have the heart.
Twisting her lips into a wispy smile, she grabbed his hand and patted it. Her fingertips felt bony and cold. He clasped them and rubbed them until they were warm.
If I don't know what's going on, how can I help you?
Young man, I've said the same to you for years. Half the time, I have no idea what you're feeling.
Sorry, Aunt May.
Shh, hush. We've been through that. If you ever want to know the best way to help me, the answer is to help yourself. Be happy and productive.
But Aunt May...
Neither of them noticed Dr. Bromwell at the door until he spoke.
Peter, a word?
Sure. Stay right here, okay? None of those acrobatics now.
And here I was looking forward to starting that body sculpting class.
Look who's telling jokes for a change. That's a good sign, right, Doc?
It certainly is. Outside, please.
In a scene he'd witnessed in a dozen sappy movies and soap operas, Peter slumped against the hallway wall. The doctor stood up straight, bending his neck closer.
Her liver function has been declining for years. She'll need a transplant if it gets any worse. The procedure is common, but at her age, any invasive surgery carries greater risk. Because of that, she'll be far down the donor waiting list. On the other hand, if a family member volunteered, we could perform the transplant as soon as she's strong enough, perhaps as early as next week. I know she's not a blood relative, but your medical records indicate you're likely compatible. If you're willing, there are some tests I'd like to perform. We could start in the morning.
Of course, of course.
But as the doctor described the biopsy, a terrible reality dawned on Peter.
My blood's radioactive. My DNA has been altered. A transplant from me could kill her.
Mouth half open, he stopped nodding and found himself shaking his head.
No. Sorry, I'm gonna have to think about this.
Of course. You've already had a shock today, and it's a big decision. Take some time, study the information in this packet. But be aware, her liver function will most likely continue to fail. We are on the clock.
Peter's mind was reeling. At some point, he mumbled his thanks and stumbled to the waiting room to stare numbly at the pamphlet describing the procedure. No more than a second later, Anna Watson stormed in, her eyes red and wide. Wielding a bouquet of flowers like a cudgel, she slammed them into his shoulder. Fresh petals flew everywhere.
You have to think about it!
He raised his hand to block the second blow, but Anna's real weapon was the horrified pain in her voice, and it cut deep.
I heard everything, you selfish coward! You're just going to let her die? That woman's done everything for you, your whole life, and you're going to let her die?
As soon as he left the hospital, Peter found the nearest hiding spot and switched into his red and blues.
Aunt May's dying, and there's nothing I can do.
He took to the building tops, soared above the streets, raced through urban nooks and mazes that only he could find. But even New York couldn't supply the distraction he needed. If anything, the city bore the same old stink as his life.
Nothing ever changes, except that it gets worse.
No matter how high or fast he moved, it all felt like a worthless routine.
What else can I do? Sit around and wait? Where else can I go? Back home to hope Harry feels sorry enough for me to have a conversation? I may as well try to take some Spider-Man pics.
He'd turned in so few to the Bugle lately that JJJ was threatening to fire him. Without that lousy salary, he couldn't afford the lousy books to pass his lousy class. And then...
Then what? If I can't even protect Aunt May, what difference does it make what I do?
He dropped down onto a townhouse roof near ESU and resisted the temptation to kick the brick chimney to pieces. He looked out and around, hoping the stillness would somehow reach inside and calm him.
What is it, like 3 a.m.?
He swooped by Captain Stacy's old precinct house. When a new building had been constructed a few blocks away, This one had been converted into an annex to store old files and evidence. The brick walls sported bits of graffiti. Some windows were cracked. While a few security lights still glowed in the halls of the upper floors, most were broken. But there was another light, weak and flickering, visible beyond the low basement windows, and it was moving. Hopping down for a closer look, he saw that one of the windows wasn't just cracked, it had been smashed.
Randy said some students think the place is haunted. It's probably some freshman ghost hunting on a dare, but a break-in is a break-in.
Angling through the broken window, he entered quietly. The entire floor was packed with shelves and filing cabinets. The only remnants of the building's previous purpose were a few concrete walls with the cell doors removed. Without their iron bars, they formed a sort of open maze. You could see the flickering light moving along the far wall.
Kind of a mini version of that warehouse at the end of Raiders.
Spider-Man set up his camera in a high corner. He hoped the wide angle would provide a decent view of the ad hoc labyrinth.
Sounds like whoever it is found whatever it was they wanted.
The flickering light went out. Fortunately, the camera's infrared could capture the vandal's face, even in the dark.
Guess they'll be leaving soon, which gives me an idea for a better photo op.
Sealing the broken window with webbing, he angled the camera toward the only other way out, the basement door. Then he blocked the exit and waited. Sure enough, a slight figure appeared beneath the window. Peter couldn't make out his features. It was just a shadow emerging from shadow. The figure climbed to the windowsill. Finding his way out sealed, the crook looked around and hopped back down.
Okay, come to Papa.
The figure re-emerged dead ahead, just as Spider-Man had planned. They saw each other at the same time, illuminated by the headlights of a passing car.
That's no college student. It's a kid.
Out of my way, you bastard, or I'll rip your guts out!
Dude, you kiss your mother with that mouth?
His web shot out, but the boy dove into the labyrinth.
I know you think you can play hide and seek in there, pal, but this is the only way out. And I'm feeling pretty patient. I'm not gonna turn you in. Just put whatever it is you've got back, and we can call it a night. Okay?
After 5 minutes, Spider-Man realized he wasn't feeling all that patient. Thinking his spider signal might spook the boy, he flashed his insignia along the aisles formed by the shelves. Nothing budged. On the other hand, the footprints it revealed in dust told him where the boy was hiding. Clicking off the light, he crept among the tall shelves.
A couple more steps and I can... Ow! That little brat doubled back behind me!
He spun, hands out, and faced a wave of falling evidence racks. With no time to leap away, nowhere to go in the mess of boxes and metal-framed shelves, Peter was buried in seconds. But not for long. He flexed his arms, clearing enough of the files for him to spot the boy at the exit. A cardboard box cradled under one arm. He was trying to pry open the door with a crowbar. Spider-Man tried to move, but his ankle was pinned between a collapsed shelf's scissored supports. He could yank himself free, but the sharp steel would do some damage. Leaving him with a limp he'd rather not have to deal with or explain. He fired dual webs from his wrist shooters. One missed, hitting the debris. The other sailed through and caught the box the boy was holding. An easy tug wrenched it away from him.
Damn it!
Spider-Man caught the box, then turned to prying apart the steel wrapped around his ankle. The thief hesitated an instant, then tore open the door and bolted into the night. In the seconds it took Peter to free himself and follow, the kid had vanished along one of a dozen possible paths. Taking to the roof, Spider-Man scanned the streets and sidewalks, but they were empty. The thief was gone. The web-slinger turned to the box, marked evidence. The seal was already broken, so he opened it, revealing a familiar stone tablet.
This thing again? No way!
He thought about it for a moment.
It's not my responsibility. Easy enough to leave it dangling for the police to find, right?
The next morning, back in his room, Peter sat at his desk staring at the tablet, asking himself over and over the same question.
Why didn't I just leave it there? What's wrong with me?
In part, it was because of the signature on the form he'd found in the evidence box. George Stacy's confident pen strokes were their own sort of relic, conjuring memories of the captain's wise, steady hand. The thing that had really sealed Peter's decision, though, was the images his camera had captured. There were 6 shots of the boy's face. None were perfect, but a few were clear enough to see a vague resemblance to a certain Silvio Manfredi.
Is it his grandson? A relative? Or worse, is Silvermane somehow back?
Peter flipped over the stone, hefted the weight, and returned it to the box. He slipped it under his bed.
At this rate, I should probably keep the damn thing and have it made into a lamp.
Truthfully, though, it was a welcome distraction. He still had time before class, and hospital visiting hours weren't until mid-afternoon. The latest update from Dr. Bromwell said that Aunt May's levels were stable, but again with that ominous "for now." At least he had some time to figure out what to say about the transplant.
Maybe I should tell Bromwell the truth about me. If only so he starts looking for other ways to help her. Is there some sort of client-attorney privilege with doctors? If nothing else, I sure could use some advice. Speaking of attorneys, I know the perfect place to start investigating the break-in. It's been a while, but I still remember the way to Caesar Cicero's office.
He made the switch to Spider-Man and headed for Midtown. He scaled the building's 30 stories, looked in through a window, and frowned. Several walls inside the venerable skyscraper had been knocked down, giving the new Magia leader's personal office a full quarter of the floor.
Looks like he's still feeling his oats, which only makes the delightful fellow that much easier to find.
Indeed, no fewer than 12 windows gave the clinging hero a view of the squat man, seated behind the largest desk he'd ever seen.
Talk about compensating. You could land an airplane on that thing.
Cicero was the picture of satisfaction, his feet up and shoes off. He flexed his toes, staring happily out at the billowing clouds and blue sky above the city. His wide face wore a relaxed smile, as if the world were a joke and someone had just slipped him the punchline. The smile remained undisturbed until Spider-Man wrenched open the window and hopped inside.
Glad you didn't replace these classic push-out casements with something I couldn't open. Otherwise, I'd have had to smash my way in.
Cicero scrambled forward, reaching for an alarm button or a concealed weapon. Then he seemed to think better of it. He flopped back into his seat.
There's also a nice new front door, which you could have, used.
And missed that beautiful mix of fear and guilt on your face? No way.
You like it so much, take a picture. For that matter, take my keys and get the whole place on video.
Straightening his spine, Cicero unhooked a keyring from his pants and tossed it on the carpeted floor between them.
Is the one for the secret corridor labeled this time?
I've got nothing to hide from you or anyone else.
Really? Pinky swear?
Cicero slashed his stubby finger across his shirt, making his power tie flutter.
Cross my heart and hope you die. These days, the businesses I run are completely legit.
Right. The kinder, gentler Magia I've been reading about in Gangster Today. All on the up and up. On paper, anyway.
You're the lawyer now. Of course on paper. How do they say it? The age of the physical object is over. It's all in the ether. We make more money moving money around than we ever did. Excuse me, ever would have from any illegal trade, if we had ever done such things, which, of course, we did not.
Unimpressed, Spider-Man sat on the desk.
Things like kidnapping? I always wondered how you got out of that.
You want to chat about the old days? Fine, let's chat.
Cicero stood, turned his back on the web slinger, and poured some scotch from a crystal decanter on the bar behind his desk.
Sorry, I'm not offering you any, but it's the good stuff, and, well, you ain't worth it. Where were we? Right. Kidnapping. As per the depositions, Yeah, I was present in certain named locations along with those unfortunate victims. On the other hand, during the actual commission of any crimes perpetrated upon them, said victims were hooded and, ergo ipso facto, unable to distinguish between those responsible and mere bystanders like myself. As I said under oath, I was en route to report their captivity to the authorities when I was assaulted and illegally detained by a certain web crawler. He, as it turned out, was unavailable to testify, rendering his side of the story moot. And maybe, just maybe, someone with my resources managed to pin the remaining charges on the Kingpin's pal, Wesley. He'll probably weasel out of it when the case goes to trial in another 6 months. So, before I add trespassing and intimidation charges to the long list of beefs the cops have with you, why don't you stop with the self-righteous BS and tell me what the hell you want?
Have it your way.
Spider-Man pinged a paperclip on the desk into the snifter in Cicero's hand.
Ah! Did you have to?
Yeah, kinda. But to answer your first question, there was an attempted theft last night.
Oh, an attempted theft in New York City! Mercy, how shocking! I already told you we don't do that stuff no more.
He reached down to the floor, scooped up his keyring.
See for yourself.
Without touching any part of the attorney, Spider-Man kicked the ring from his hand. The keys flew across the office end over end and landed in the pocket of the fur-lined overcoat hanging in the corner. Cicero stared the wall crawler in the costumed whites of his eyes.
I'm telling the truth. If it's illegal, I don't know about it. I even let Marco go. Believe me, it was tough. That dumb giant was so loyal. It hurt, but he just didn't fit in with the new corporate culture, you know? What'd they try to take? Must have been big to bring you out from the cobwebs. Gold bullion, some experimental death ray that turns hamsters into monster trucks.
Somebody tried to steal the tablet.
The tablet? Why?
Huh? Maybe he doesn't know anything.
I was hoping you'd tell me.
Wish I could. I never believed in curses until I ran into that hunk of stone. Kingpin wanted it, he's in a coma. It nearly brought down the Magia, and you saw how it worked for Silvermane. Knowing that, why would I... Scratch that. Why would anyone want something that turns you into nothing? As a poison, there's 1,000 easier ways to kill a guy. If I ever heard someone was after it, I'd be the first to call the cops.
On the one hand, Cicero sounded sincere. On the other hand, that was his job, and he was good at it. Peter had brought the photos of the thief. He thought about showing them to Cicero, but held back.
If the Magia is behind this, I don't want them to know about any evidence I have. If not, I don't want to give them any reason to get involved.
Did Silvermane have any family?
Ha! If he did, they'd sure as hell be hiding from me.
The warehouse had been scheduled for demolition for years, but not everything dies as it should. The owners had planned to put up a new high-rise on the lot, but their funding had collapsed along with the fortunes of their largest investor, Wilson Fisk. Now the building stood neglected, occasionally shedding hunks of rusted steel and shards of glass like rotting teeth or thinning hair. So much of the structure was already gone that whatever nature the city allowed would soon claim all of it, without the need for a wrecking ball or human will. Those few people desolate or desperate enough to ignore the hazard signs were kept away by the constant creaking that threatened a final collapse. In fact, every form of life stayed away, rats and roaches included, except the boy. The always angry boy. Well, he couldn't be sure whether he'd been here before. He somehow felt he belonged. He'd found the half-collapsed stairs that led to the basement easily enough. There, the concrete walls and foundation remained as solid and silent as a tomb, or better yet, a memorial. A shrine he could build for himself. For his anger. No, not a shrine. A palace. A memory palace, like in that book he'd found, Rhetorica ad Herennium. It was written by Cicero, a name he associated with treachery. But this was some other Cicero, a Roman. The book said to pick a place in your head, a place you know, and fill it up with the stuff you want to remember. Then, Whenever you needed to remember something, you could find it where you left it. But when he got here, the boy could barely remember anything on his own. So he decided to one-up the Roman smartass by making his palace real and filling it up with memories he could actually touch. And so here it was, lit by stolen candles and stolen flashlights, furnished with stolen chairs and a stolen bed. The only thing he hadn't stolen was the cinder blocks. There were plenty already lying around, so he used them to build the stepped platform at the center of his palace. The platform that led to his throne. He didn't know why everything had to be stolen. Maybe because nothing was really his, but stealing made everything his. Stealing felt important, so he went with it, tearing pages out of library newspapers and books when he could, using stolen credit cards for the printouts when he had to. Old things felt important too, like the 1928 Thompson submachine gun he'd swiped from the antique gun shop. Old things made him feel safer, as if he were less likely to lose them because they'd been around for so long. That didn't make sense exactly, but again, he went with it. He knelt before the cinderblock throne, not to bow before a great power, just to make it easier to reach the pictures he had of the really old thing, the tablet. That wasn't his yet, but he wanted it most of all. After all his work finding it, the guy in the costume, Spider-Man, had stopped him. Touching the image, though, let him imagine he was touching the stone. Sometimes he imagined so hard, he thought he might actually remember his past. When he was done with that, he pulled out the only thing he thought maybe he hadn't stolen, the only thing that might really be his. Gently, he brushed away the bits of concrete and wetness from the cover of the flip-over notebook, rolled the rubber band off, and found a particular page. Reading the words, he tried to sing.
Drink, drink.
It was wrong. His voice was wrong. The melody was wrong. He tried again.
Drink, drink.
Still not right. He knew the words. He'd memorized them from the notebook, but the notebook didn't have the melody, and he couldn't read music even if it did. So he had to remember it.
Drink, drink. Ah!
No, that wasn't it at all. The answer had to be somewhere. If not in the palace he'd made, then locked inside himself. Locks didn't scare him. He had a pretty strong feeling he could pick any he came across. But first, he had to find the right door. Well after 1 a.m., Detective Daryl Tanner was still buried in papers.
Done with my filing, so I thought I'd say goodnight. Or good morning.
His partner, Miles Langston, spotted the stacks of papers on Tanner's desk.
Whew. What'd you do to get on Connolly's bad side?
Nothing. I asked for it. Need the overtime. Things are tight back home.
Tight was an understatement, but there were reasons he kept the specifics of his financial problems private. When the Kingpin had vanished, Daryl's take-home had dropped by half. These days, the Magia gave him a little something, but not enough to keep him from having to raid his daughter's college fund to pay the mortgage. Miles was single and seemed carefree, but he nodded sympathetically.
I hear that. Want me to put on another pot for you before I head out?
Nah, I'm almost done, but I thought I'd run the clock up a bit, you know?
I didn't hear that. Say hi to the family.
Will do.
He watched Miles walk down the hall and enter the elevator. He kept watching until the little light above indicated his partner had reached the lobby. Satisfied that he was alone, Miles turned back to his work. It had taken the boys on site at the old annex half a day to clean up the mess from the break-in. Most of that time was spent picking things up and matching them with their boxes. It was Daryl's job to match what they found with the old paper logs. Half the time, the files weren't in the same format as the log. The rest of the time, he couldn't read the handwriting. He checked things over twice more. He was right. There was only one box missing, placed there under the authority of the late Captain George Stacy. Putting aside the master list, Daryl flipped through the physical carbons, found the matching number, and tugged the sheet free. Though the description was vague, he knew what it meant. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. Then he went back to the master and logged in the only empty box, so the rest of the world would think it was still there. safe and sound. Then he got up and headed to the chief detective's office. Daryl had no idea why Connolly always worked so late, and he never felt like asking.
Chief?
Got that report for me, Daryl?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
And?
6 different kinds of forms, 3 databases, and everything's accounted for. Guess we owe the integrity of our evidence annex to Spider-Man.
She rolled her eyes as he handed over the lists.
Unless he was the one doing the breaking and entering. This is good work. Glad I had an old pro on it. Take an extra hour on the timesheet, but no more.
Thanks, boss.
Rather than head home, Tanner walked a few blocks and then pulled out the burner he used for his special calls.
I think I've got something. That old tablet the Magia stole a couple of years ago? All this time, it's been in the evidence annex. At least, until yesterday. Someone lifted it. Judging from the webbing on the scene, Spider-Man either has it himself or has an idea who does. I figured knowing it's back on the streets is worth something.
Well, you figured wrong. Cicero doesn't want anything to do with that thing.
What, it spooks him? I know it's supposed to be magic, but...
Spooked? No. More like he doesn't want anything around that reminds him of Silvermane. You've been with us a while, so I'll tell you. But you didn't hear it from me. Gossip upstairs is that the wall crawler paid a visit today. After that, the Big C needed a 4-hour massage just to take a nap. My advice? Forget about it.
Damn. All that work for an extra $200? If I'd told the chief a priceless artifact had gone missing, I could have been up for a bonus. Now there won't even be a case file on the theft.
The only other number in the burner's contact list caught his eye. It was old, probably useless, but thinking about that college fund, he gave it a try.
Hello? Who is this? How did you get this number?
He'd only seen her once or twice, but that sad voice was tough to forget.
Mrs. Fisk? Daryl Tanner. I don't know if you remember me.
Detective Tanner. Of course, from our holiday party 3 years ago. This is a surprise. It's very late. Is something wrong?
Nothing wrong. I was just working on a case that reminded me of your husband. It's about something I know he wanted, very badly.
If Wesley weren't in prison, he would have answered that call. Instead, it had gone to Vanessa Fisk. She wasn't sure what she'd hoped to hear, what pale ghost she'd imagined might speak to her. She wasn't even sure why she cared enough to keep the phone here, let alone answer. But she had, and what she heard stirred her dormant heart. Having taken to sleeping in the center of the colossal bed she'd shared with Wilson, she had to use her legs to pull herself across the width before reaching the edge. For the first time in 16 hours, she put her bare feet to the floor. By rote, rather than modesty, she donned an opaque green robe to cover her negligee. She remembered the way her husband had looked at her, and nearly ventured a smile. But that was back when love had been something other than cruel. When love was the heart of creation. She pressed her forehead to the glass and watched the surf. She remembered him warning her to avoid windows, always fearful one of his many enemies would come for her. There was no reason for anyone to threaten her now. The only thing of value she'd ever held was the Kingpin's heart, and it was forfeit. The 2 guards downstairs and the 2 on the grounds of the beach house had only been kept on to honor her husband's loyalty to his people. Why had she answered the phone? When Wilson had been healthy? No, the word healthy didn't do him justice. When he'd been the brutish force whose very presence screamed life, she'd had no interest in his business dealings. Even now, when personal necessity should have been enough to force her involvement, she only paid enough attention to his moribund empire's intricacies to ensure the continued payment of his medical bills. And in that case, she allowed the lawyers to tell her which papers to sign. She never ever cared. Ever since he'd entered that horrid torpor, she'd had little interest in anything. She often startled herself with the number of hours she could spend staring off into nothing. But the tablet could change everything. There were many things she recalled about Wilson, his moods, his delights, his demons, but she particularly remembered the sparkle in his eyes when he'd first decided that the artifact had to be his. And among the few things she knew about the underworld, she was aware of the rumors that the stone had somehow made Silvermane young and whole again. She'd also heard rumors about the dread result, and wondered whether that was due to Wesley's interference. Her head and heart had been empty for so long, the world drained of meaning. Her favorite dishes tasted like ash. Paintings that had once taken her breath away were hollow scrawls. Music that had once lifted her soul jangled like a distant cacophony.
Could the tablet do the same for my love? Could it make Wilson whole again?
If so, there'd be no need for Richard's guilt. With the right words, she could convince the proud Beast Father to forgive his only son. She knew she could. And then, they could all be together again. The possibility, no matter how distant, no matter how slight, kept her from going back to bed. Even if it meant caring again, even if it meant embracing the darker side of her husband's dealings.
Because love was once the heart of creation, and creation could be a bloody, bloody thing.
The next morning, Peter emerged to greet Harry. His thoughts were dominated by his aunt and the tablet, but he was still determined to make an effort.
Hey, Harry. Gotta go to the Bugle to drop off some photos, then get to class, but I've got some time. I thought I'd see who was hanging at the Coffee Bean. Wanna come with?
The death stare Harry gave him stopped him mid-stride. Harry picked up his breakfast plate, still half full of food, and tossed it into the sink. Peter had seen his roommate afraid, arrogant, and irritable when struggling with drugs. But this was different.
What's up with you?
Harry pushed past Peter, grabbed his cardigan from the thrift store coat stand, and stuffed it under his arm.
Harry!
Peter tried to think of anything he might have said or done, or anything he hadn't said or done, that might have set Harry off, but he couldn't. They barely spoke anymore.
I could follow him as Spidey, make sure he's clean, but I don't want to start eavesdropping on the poor guy like he's some supervillain, unless I've got a good reason.
Peter's arrival at the Coffee Bean made the point moot. Harry still looked grim, slouched over a hot cup of Java. Mary Jane, Randy, and Flash Thompson, home for good since his tour had ended, sat with him. They didn't look particularly happy either. In fact, when he tried to pull up a chair to join them, they all gave him the same death stare.
What? Did I rob a bank in my sleep or something?
Harry's face twitched. Flash clenched a fist. Randy turned away. Mary Jane pursed her lips. Wrapping her hand around her mug, she turned it left and right as she tried to explain.
Tiger, Aunt Anna told me what happened at the hospital last night. She was very upset. The doctor wanted to test you, but you refused?
Oh.
I spent the last 2 years taking enemy fire for people I didn't even know, and you're afraid to save your aunt's life because, what, you're too much of a coward to go under the knife?
The old accusation didn't hit him as hard as it once had, but the disappointment in all their eyes did.
It's not that.
Then what is it?
The silence stretched until Harry pressed a fingernail hard into the wooden tabletop, trying to scratch out one of the old stains.
I know what it is. We all do. It's only Peter being Peter, thinking only about Peter, just like Peter always has.
Hey, take it easy. His aunt's really sick.
And my father is dead.
It's been a rough year for all of us. Peter, you know me. I keep it light whenever I can. You like to be the silent, brooding type. But I think we've all gotten old enough to know you can't always be what you want. Some things you just have to deal with. So please, Petey, why don't you tell us what's going on?
He tried to conjure some explanation that would at least make some sense, but he couldn't. Or maybe, after all this time, he just didn't have the heart.
I can't.
And he left. Thinking that for once, dealing with Jonah wouldn't be the most painful part of his day, Peter made his way to the Bugle offices. Betty was out sick. A polite but befuddled intern was trying to cover the phones in her absence. The intern let him pass without a second glance. On the way to Jameson's door, Robbie Robertson stepped up and put a sympathetic hand on Peter's shoulder.
Randy told me what's going on with your aunt. I hope she recovers.
Thanks, Mr. Robertson.
The city editor tapped his knuckle to his lips, as if debating whether to speak his mind.
Pete, before you head in, I want to show you something.
His back to the staff, Robbie slightly lifted his white shirt to reveal a 5-inch scar down the center of his abdomen.
Appendectomy. When I was in high school, the ER surgeon left some bleeding, so they had to go back in to cauterize it. Was I scared? Sure. But I made it. You can too.
Not sure what to say. Peter nodded dumbly.
Did I hear that lazy ingrate who calls himself a photographer come in?
At least I can count on JJJ to stick to business.
Jameson leveled a pencil at him.
It is you.
I've got some Spidey pics.
Your aunt's lying in the hospital, and you're out gallivanting with that vigilante? I thought you were better than that, kid.
Last time I saw you, you were screaming that if I didn't bring you in more pictures fast, I'd be fired.
Sure, blame the man who provides you with a living.
Jameson grabbed the camera and clicked through.
I could splatter these across the front page. Spider-Man is beaten by 10-year-old. But I won't. And you know why?
Because people are sick of you attacking Spider-Man?
No. Wait, did that new intern show you our survey results? Well, that's got nothing to do with it. The only reason I'm not using these photos is to teach you a lesson about priorities. Family first!
Between the hospital, class, and the tablet, Peter had expected a long day. He hadn't expected the morning, all on its own, to feel like 2 weeks. So when he switched to Spider-Man and took to traveling high above the sidewalks, he didn't kid himself that acrobatics could take his mind off things. It wasn't the usual guilt that plagued him, or the sense that the world had done him wrong. It wasn't, oh no, everyone hates me. It wasn't even Aunt May needs me, and I can't be there for her. It was the sickly realization that Aunt May could actually die. Part of him knew it had to happen eventually, but she was his mother figure, his anchor. He hated to think her feet might get chilly if she didn't have enough blankets, let alone that one day she'd end up beneath the ground in that endless field of stones. He was still thinking about it when he landed on the rear wall of ESU's Life Sciences building. Long minutes passed before he remembered why he'd come.
I'm so twisted up I can't think straight. No wonder Aunt May didn't want to tell me about her health.
A one-armed man, alone in the classroom, whirled from his blackboard calculations and greeted Spider-Man with a smile. This time, Peter didn't need to look up a hieroglyph expert online. One of the only 2 people who'd managed to translate the tablet, Dr. Kurt Connors, happened to be an ESU adjunct, on track to become a full professor. He cranked open the window and beckoned Spider-Man in.
What can I do for you?
Spider-Man touched down on the floor and pulled the webbed stone off his back.
I really hate to tell you this, but...
After a brief explanation, he showed Connors the photos.
Is it possible Silvermane survived?
I see the resemblance, especially in his eyes. But honestly, I have no idea if it's possible or what it might mean.
Did the tablet have any instructions? Like, take 2 of me and call me in the morning?
Once Wesley and I separated the chemical formulation from the prose, we focused on the chemistry. With some further study, though, I might be able to learn something. Do you want to leave it with me?
Doc, you're one of the only people in the world I trust, but as long as I don't know who's after this thing or why, I don't want to let it out of my sight. That's as much for your safety as it is for anyone else's. Can you make a charcoal rubbing of it or something?
A rubbing wouldn't work. The meaning of the glyphs varies with their depth. Don't have a 3D scanner handy, but I do have some quick-setting silicone that I use to make fossil molds. I hesitate to use it on such a singular artifact. But the stone seems durable, and I suppose we don't have much choice. Can you spare 15 minutes?
Spider-Man glanced at the clock. There was plenty of time before his advanced experimental physics class.
For an ancient relic? Sure.
He set the tablet on the desk. Connors covered it with lubricant, then poured the liquid silicone and worked it into the carved runes. As Spider-Man watched, his mind drifted back to Aunt May.
He is one of the only people I can trust. Why not trust him with something else?
Doc, you mind if I ask you something more personal?
Are you kidding? You saved my family's life and kept me from spending the rest of mine as a mindless predator. Ask whatever you want.
Okay then. Someone I love is going to need a liver transplant, and I'm the most available donor. Only my body and my blood are, well, radioactive for starters. It's tied in with how I became what I am. I want to help, but I'm afraid that disqualifies me.
I'm sorry. Have you told the surgeon?
Peter pointed at his mask.
Right. Your identity, of course.
The tablet was covered with silicone now. Connors set a small timer and placed it next to the stone.
You probably don't want to hear this, but from what I already know about your physiology, it certainly does disqualify you. Modern surgical teams are trained to deal with a lot of things, but radioactive blood isn't one of them.
I have to do something.
Oh, I understand. Better than most. It wasn't long ago I was fiddling with the DNA of other creatures because I had to do something to help. We know how that worked out. Even if they did go ahead with the transplant, it would be the first of its kind, adding huge layers of risk to an already complicated procedure. I certainly wouldn't risk it, particularly with someone I cared for. I would try to find another way.
I was afraid you'd say something like that. Now I just have to figure out how to tell them without telling them. Thanks, Doc.
Connors peeled the rubbery cast from the stone.
How should I contact you if I learn anything?
Oh!
Spider-Man grabbed a pen and scribbled a number on a pad.
This is Peter Parker's number. He can get a hold of me. He's a student here.
The fellow who takes photos of you. If you speak to him before I do, you might want to tell him that Professor Blanton mentioned his name at a faculty meeting, and not in a good way.
Perfect.
I'll, do that.
Oh, wait. Before you go, I think I have an airtight case about the right size for the tablet. It is our only relic from a lost civilization.
Sure, as long as I can carry it.
The slim silver case was a snug fit, but it worked. Spider-Man secured it to his back and left Dr. Connors to his work. Crawling to the front of the building, he glanced across the plaza at the large Art Deco clock tower atop the recently opened exhibition hall. With plenty of time to get to class, his eyes wandered down to the line at the entrance.
Took them long enough to finish the renovations, but at least it looks like the hall's attracting plenty of those potential donors that the dean wanted to.
His body flew into a tuck jump. A park bench, of all things, came flying at him. It had been ripped from the asphalt and thrown. That meant two things. Whatever had thrown it was very strong, and not particularly subtle.
For the love of... Stay still a second, will ya?
Spider-Man didn't have to get closer to recognize his attacker. Michael Marcos stood on the sidewalk, shaking his fists. Students, food cart vendors, and faculty fled in all directions.
Get down here!
Gotta keep him where he is long enough for everyone to get to safety.
Spider-Man shot a web line that snagged a lamppost and used it to zip across the sidewalk. The balls of his feet skimmed Marco's thick black hair.
Is your memory that short? I mean, you're a perfectly fine bruiser in a pinch, but do you really want to tangle with me again?
His heels sticking to the lamppost, Spider-Man went into a sideways crouch and leapt to the thickest branch of a nearby oak. Meanwhile, Marco had torn a second bench from its foundation.
Hey, you put that back!
But of course, Marco threw it. Spider-Man's web snagged the bench in midair, letting him bring it to a landing on the grass below. By then, Marco was already ripping out a third.
Stop that! Jeez! I heard you tore a couch in half at the Stacy's. Now it's park benches? You got something against people sitting down?
You want to make me stop? Come down here and face me!
Nothing personal, but have you seen your face lately? Besides, how much longer do you think you've got before the cops show?
Long enough!
He chucked the third bench. Considering its awkward shape, The projectile flew with surprising accuracy. Spider-Man caught it with both hands, glanced at the copper plaque mounted on the top slat, and wedged it down on the branch beside him.
Aw, this one's a memorial to Miss Maddie Braustein of Long Island.
When Spider-Man stood up, Marco looked excited, eager to fight. But instead of heading down to meet him on the grass, Spider-Man sat on the treed bench. Seeing how much it irritated Man Mountain, he clasped his hands behind his head.
So what brings you, man? Or would you rather I called you Mr. Mountain?
As far as keeping people safe, it was so far so good. The plaza was almost empty, the building was sealed, and campus security was blocking off the perimeter. Unfortunately, a lean, blonde, bespectacled student chose that moment to leave his hiding spot in the bushes and run out into the open.
Help! For the love of God, help me! Nuts.
Spider-Man and Marco saw the student at the same time, but the giant was closer. Marco took off at a run, his long strides moving him farther and faster than Peter remembered. Before Spider-Man could move, Marco had snatched the runner and pinned both his arms to his chest.
Help! Ah, right in my freaking ear! Help!
Marco covered the youth's mouth, his entire face, actually, with his large hand.
One more peep and I push your head so far down into your chest, you'll have to undo your fly to sneeze. You got me?
When his captive shakily nodded, Marco turned to Spider-Man.
Gonna come down now?
Okay.
Spider-Man sailed from the tree and crouched on the ground a few yards away.
You move pretty fast, big guy. You working out?
I got a train to help me turn my deficits into advantages.
Good to know. Well, I've come to the mountain, so what do you want?
Can't you guess? The rock, I think, is in that case on your back. Got a client willing to pay, and I could really use the cash.
The Magia says they're not interested. Who hired you? Was it Silvermane?
No? You trying to trick me? He's dead!
Just hearing his old master's name really rattled him. Marco must be working for someone else.
No trick. But as long as you're gonna get all shook up like that, it'd be a shame if I didn't take advantage.
Ah!
Marco's eyes were covered with webbing. Blinded, he reached for the sticky mass, releasing the terrified student long enough for Spider-Man to grab him and deposit him 100 yards away.
Help! Help!
Take a breath, okay?
By the time Peter turned back, Marco was gone.
He pulled off my web already? Apparently he's stronger than I remember, too.
The search of the plaza and the streets beyond the Life Sciences building yielded nothing but pedestrians and cars.
How does someone his size hide so fast? Maybe I'm lucky I didn't fight him.
He glanced again at the tower clock.
And now I really do have to change and get to Professor Blanton's class.
Marco lay low in the rear of the stolen service van, pulling the remains of the gross webbing from his skin. A wad had even gotten wedged up into his hair. Word on the street was that it dissolved if you waited long enough, but Marco had never been a patient man. He grabbed it and yanked. He looked through the windshield. He'd reached the van just before the cops started arriving. Now they were all over. He was lucky they hadn't heard. Head stinging, he looked down at the little bloody clump of hair and scalp in his hand.
What a freaking waste. I don't get it. That first bench should have nailed him, but it was like he saw it coming without seeing it coming.
Marco had thought he was being so smart. Knowing that Spider-Man was present when the tablet was heisted, he'd spent hours scanning the police band. He wondered whether that costumed idiot had any idea how many eyes the cops had on him. From the chatter, it sounded like half the NYPD had a Spidey sighting pool going. When Marco saw the bulge on Spidey's back, he figured he'd hit pay dirt. But he'd blown it. Hearing Silvermane's name was like seeing the bogeyman come to life.
Oh, he can't be back. It was a trick. But if Mr. Silvermane did come back, would he be angry with me for working with someone else?
Right now, it didn't matter. Spider-Man and the tablet were gone, along with Marco's chance of collecting that sweet piece of change from Vanessa Fisk, and his big shot at impressing her. That hurt, and not just because he needed a new job. Yeah, he was strapped for cash. Since Cicero had let him go, the odd freelance enforcement jobs he got were barely enough to keep him in pocket change. But ever since he'd first scoped out the kingpin for the Magia, there was something about Vanessa Fisk he found alluring. He even kept some pictures of her tacked up over his bed, trying to add a little class to that dump.
And besides, I really want to squash Spider-Man.
For obvious reasons, Peter didn't carry his cell phone into combat. He also turned it off whenever he left it behind, lest he forget to mute it. Otherwise, a buzz or ringtone might alert a passerby to the bundle of clothing concealed in a web sack. With seconds remaining before advanced experimental physics began, Peter turned the phone back on, in case the hospital called. Reaching the lecture hall, he saw the dour Professor Blanton through the little window in the closed door, waving for him to hurry. Peter's hand grabbed the doorknob, but before he could turn it, a string of missed emergency texts made him freeze. Through the window, Blanton gave him a wary nod. There was no time to explain. Peter mouthed,
"I'm sorry,"
and bolted away. Dr. Bromwell and Dr. Fent, the woman he'd spoken with on the phone, met him in the lobby of the Presbyterian Center for Liver Disease and Transplantation. Peter's eyes shot between them. Their placid expressions were unreadable.
"What happened? Is she all right?"
She's fine.
For now. Her condition has worsened, so she's been moved to the ICU. To slow down her metabolism and hopefully stabilize her, we've put her in an induced coma.
A coma?
She's been on a steady drip of propanol. She was aware of the need and gave her consent for any treatment we deem necessary. She wanted to see you before we proceeded in case... well, we texted and waited as long as we thought safe.
My phone. The charge ran out. Can I see her?
Of course. Peter, I've known you since you were a child. I'd like to talk to you a minute about the transplant.
Actually, Doc, I want to talk about that too, but I'd like to speak to Dr. Fent alone, if that's okay.
Oh. Certainly.
Bromwell stepped back to the information desk and began checking his phone. Dr. Fent looked at Peter expectantly.
Dr. Bromwell's very close to the family, and he's great, but he gets a little chatty with my aunt sometimes. There are things about me I'd rather she not know.
Your family's not big on sharing about their medical problems, are they?
Yeah, well, I guess we worry too much about each other. Anyway, I have a blood condition that my other doctor says makes me a lousy candidate for a transplant. For her safety, not mine.
Is your doctor certain? Today, even HIV-positive patients are allowed to donate organs.
It's not AIDS, and yes, we're pretty sure.
This condition, do you have it under control?
Pretty much. I'd like to think so anyway. I'm not contagious, if that's what you're getting at. But this isn't about me. Is there anything else that can be done for my aunt?
She's already on the donor list, but I believe Dr. Bromwell explained that her age puts her at a disadvantage. There is an experimental treatment, Optical, that's shown promise restoring liver function. This hospital is conducting trials, but again, her age makes her a poor candidate. And it hasn't been approved yet, so no insurance will cover it.
What would it cost without insurance?
Over $100,000, I'm afraid.
Peter wasn't sure how long he stood there with his mouth open before he finally spoke.
Oh.
Compared to the gray semi-private room, the ICU was open and bright, with light green walls and wide window views. Cushioned seats were scattered among 10 beds, accommodating visitors staying only a few minutes, as well as family members curled up for a long haul. Peter's eyes cast about nervously until he spotted Aunt May. The thought that she would like the view of the Hudson brought some relief. Even the steady mechanical hush didn't bother him, until he was close enough to realize it came from a ventilator connected to a flexible blue tube that ran down her throat. The yellow tinge had faded a bit from her skin. Some pink showed through beneath a nearly invisible peach fuzz on her face. She appeared well cared for, freshly bathed, her gray and white hair neatly combed back. The pattern on her hospital gown was faded but clean. The off blue would have matched her eyes had they been open. Still holding it together, Peter pulled up a chair. But when he sat down, suddenly he didn't know whether to scream or to sob. Whatever slight wisdom the years had given him, there would always be some things that made him feel like a helpless child.
Great power may bring great responsibility, but can also be pretty damn useless. I don't have anywhere near the money to save her, but I've got the secret of eternal youth sitting under my bed. Something humanity's been after since we got up on 2 feet. And what good is it? If it wasn't so sad, it'd be funny. Unless, if Silvermane is still alive, maybe that elixir can help Aunt May.
An odd intuition made him look up. Anna Watson was at the entrance, not quite coming in, not quite turning back. Wondering how long she'd been standing there, he rose to offer her his chair.
Mrs. Watson?
Looking as if she was bracing herself for something unpleasant, she stepped closer. Noticing the brush she carried in her hand, Peter realized she was the one who'd combed his aunt's hair.
You've been here all this time?
She's my best friend.
Of course. I'm grateful she has you.
And you? No. I promised Mary Jane I wouldn't say anything, so I'll keep my opinions to myself. I think it would be best if I waited outside until you've left.
No, you take the chair, please. I was just leaving.
He slinked out. With little over an hour left in Professor Blanton's 3-hour class, he headed back to ESU. Hoping to avoid attention, Peter tried to sneak in the back of the lecture hall. Of course, the door was locked. The students seated along the aisle took pity and reached out to turn the handle. All eyes turned to Peter. The wiry, balding Blanton, who always looked exasperated, slapped the side of his lectern to get his class's attention.
Quiet!
Peter tried to move toward an empty seat.
Don't just sit down yet, Mr. Parker. I'd like to know what sort of excuse you have this time.
I realize I owe you an apology, sir, but I'd rather discuss that in private.
Very well. Let's get back to the rules for counting significant figures. As I was saying, all zeros between non-zero digits are significant. A digit is significant if it contributes to the value of the number.
Maneuvering an obstacle course of backpacks and folded legs, Peter tried to reach the only open spot quietly. Entering, a harried Dr. Connors zeroed in on Peter.
Sorry for the interruption, John. Do you mind if I borrow Peter Parker for a bit?
Blanton tossed his hands in the air.
Oh, not at all, Kurt. Please, by all means, keep him.
They all but ran to the Life Sciences building. Once they were inside his faculty lab, Connors locked the door behind them.
What is it, Doc? Spider-Man told me you were trying to figure something out from that old tablet. Did you?
I did. Turns out he was right. Silvermane is alive.
But how? I thought the guy vanished into non-existence or something.
The problem is, or something. I was making progress with the inscriptions when it dawned on me that a simple experiment could provide a much faster answer. It'd probably be best if I showed you.
Connors flipped on an electron microscope.
Usually the specimen has to be specially prepared and held inside a vacuum chamber, but this new microscope, donated by Oscorp, is much more flexible.
As Connor adjusted the device, a monstrous image appeared on a monitor. A gangly, winged creature, its exoskeleton translucent ochre, its oversized head consisting almost entirely of 2 bulbous red eyes.
It looks like a refugee from a 1950s monster movie. What's it got to do with the tablet?
I'm getting to it. That's Delania americana, a species of mayfly. It's unique in that the females have a normal life expectancy of roughly 5 minutes. When Silvermane drank that formula, he began getting younger. As that process continued, it accelerated, so that within hours, he was an infant. Now, if you consider human life expectancy as roughly 70 years...
I get it. With the mayfly, it could all happen in seconds. So you made more formula?
Connors removed a small vial from his lab coat pocket and held it up. It was half filled with a clear, sparkling liquid.
Frankly, I was surprised it worked at all on an insect. It's as if the chemical composition adapts to its host.
Using a dropper, he placed a small amount on the specimen. On the screen, a single drop appeared as a deluge. The mayfly sloshed in the liquid, but ultimately pulled itself to the surface.
The life cycle of the mayfly consists of 4 stages, which for our purposes I'll recite backwards. The last, the adult stage, is called the imago.
As the fly tried to dry itself, its color grew softer and duller, its legs and tail shorter. The wings acquired a bluish tint.
This is the subimago.
The wings folded into the body, which became long and slender. Small claws appeared at the ends of its 6 legs.
The nymph.
In less than a second, the body shrank into a tiny oval that settled to the bottom of the specimen container.
And the egg.
As the egg kept shrinking, Connors adjusted the magnification. Some embryonic features remained visible, but as it grew smaller still, the lines between body parts vanished.
Now we're basically watching individuation in reverse.
The individual cells popped back into one another until there was only one single cell left.
Until we're left with the initial zygote, or fertilized egg. From here, you'd think the cell would disintegrate into nothingness, the way we thought Silvermane ended. However,
after a few moments, the cells began to divide.
The cycle starts over at the beginning. At first, things proceed at a normal pace, but then the process accelerates until the mayfly reaches the end of its cycle.
Peter watched the egg form. A nymph emerged and became a subimago, then a fully formed imago. Another second later, the fly fell on its back, twitched its legs, and stopped moving.
Is it dead?
If not, it's as close to it as anything can get.
But then, the legs twitched again, and the imago righted itself. Over the next half minute, it went through the cycle backwards again. Subimago, nymph, egg, zygote.
And it keeps doing that over and over forever?
As far as I can tell.
But when Silvermane drank that stuff, he lost decades in hours. And that was about 2 years ago. The boy Spider-Man saw was around 10. Wouldn't he be older or younger by now?
I can't be sure exactly how it works, or if it's as stable in humans. But judging by the mayfly, the process starts off at a normal rate, then gradually accelerates. It may have taken this long for him to reach age 10.
That's why he wants the tablet. He must know what's happening to him, and he has to suspect where his aging is headed. He's probably hoping the tablet contains some way to stop the cycle. Who wouldn't? It's like a curse.
Yes. Silvermane as a child is bad enough, and he'll be an adult pretty soon. I thought Spider-Man should know.
I'll get him the message right away.
Good. After that, you should probably try to catch the end of that class. Blanton looked pretty angry.
Connors clicked a pen open on his knee and scribbled on an ESU memo pad.
I'll give you a note, saying I needed your help saving some lab samples.
I'm not sure it'll help, but thanks.
Then it struck him. If there was a way to stop the cycle, the elixir could help Aunt May.
Something else?
Spider-Man had told Connors about the transplant, so that question would be better coming from the web-slinger, not Peter Parker.
No, the whole thing is just so freaky. Thanks again for the note.
Connors destroyed the mayfly specimen. It had already lived 4 times its normal lifespan. Not knowing how its altered biology might interact with the ecosystem, he couldn't very well release it. The alternative, letting it loop through infinite lifetimes while trapped in the confines of a specimen dish, felt cruel. He rinsed the container at the lab sink, crushed the tiny body between his fingers, and watched it swirl into the hazardous waste disposal. From the recesses of his subconscious mind, an odd urge arose, a desire to eat the mayfly. Lizards were fond of bugs. It was only the sort of passing thought he had every day, the way an average person might experience a fleeting desire to throttle a driver who cut him off in traffic. The lizard hadn't posed any real danger of resurfacing since the kidnapping. It did make Connors sure he'd given Spider-Man the right advice about a transplant. The wall-crawler was fortunate to be able to use his powers for the benefit of others, but the two of them shared that invisible wall that separated them from the rest of their species. From the corner of his eye, he caught a lithe figure climbing in from the window.
Spider-Man.
Wrong, Doc.
But the clothes were wrong. The voice too young.
Silvermane.
My nickname, right? Good to have someone call me that again.
You're not sure?
I'm sure enough.
He looked down at a scrap of paper in his hand.
Dr. Connors, right? The guy who got me here in the first place? It's funny what memories come and go, Doc, but listening in on your chat with that college kid filled in some more blanks. Maybe I forgot my nickname for a second, but I still followed most of that conversation. As smart as you are, you missed some stuff.
The gangly teen grew closer. His entire body was a bit off, as if stretched too quickly by the hormonal changes of puberty. But Connors was more concerned with the thing in his long-fingered hands. An old-fashioned Tommy gun. Hit by a body memory of the gangster's previous threats, Connors fought to stay calm. Silvermane's memory was clearly piecemeal, his very identity muddled. He couldn't have his former connections. And Billy and Martha were safe, visiting relatives in Florida.
Do you want to tell me what I missed?
Do I want to tell you? No. But you're gonna want to listen like your life depended on it.
When he waved the barrel in Connor's face, the lizard writhed inside.
First off, it's not so smooth, like that fly you just flushed. Sometimes nothing happens for weeks or months. Then I get this growth spurt that hurts so bad I'm moaning on the ground like a whipped dog. When I get back up, I'm a year older and wiser.
Noticing his reflection in the window, the boy rubbed his cheek.
What do you think I am now? 14? Can't wait to get some decent facial hair. Anyway, when I first came back from that, I don't know, darkness, next I know there's these fat arms lifting me up into this huge face. Not the face of God or nothing, just some cleaning lady. She took me to a hospital where they poked and prodded me like a pincushion. I was like a baby. I had no idea who I was, but I knew I had to be someone. It was like the idea of me had never gone away, but it wasn't really with me either. Like you think you know everything about the love of your life, only it turns out they've been a tease all along. I hightailed it out of there as soon as I could, but it wasn't until I taught myself to read that I started piecing it all together.
His acne-pocked brow twisted.
When
Connors nodded sympathetically, the boy turned the gun on him again. The familiar predatory glow of Silvermane's eyes shone against the black of his pupils. He put his chin down and bobbed his head in a classic gesture of aggression. Connors realized his mistake. Silvermane was only telling him his symptoms because he expected Connors to cure him. In the end, like everything else, he would rather keep his experiences to himself. Connors knew what that was like.
Happy as I am to have kicked the Grim Reaper's butt, by the time I hit 30, it's gotta stop, and you've gotta help. Not here, though. Don't want your buddy Spider-Man or that Parker kid sniffing around. Take what you need, but either you come with me, or they won't find enough of you to bury.
I'll do what I can, but I'll need equipment. I have a place, not far. No one knows about it, I swear.
Guess we all have our secrets, huh? Well then, what are we waiting for? I ain't getting any younger. Yet. Let's get going.
While Connors collected his notes and the cast of the tablet, the Tommy gun remained trained on him. As he wondered what to do next, a dark thing prodded from the back of his mind. He should have eaten that bug.
On the other hand, if a family member volunteered, we could perform the transplant as soon as she's strong enough.
They sloshed through the dark sewers. Connors held the flashlight, while Silvermane kept the machine gun pressed into the small of his back. The persistent danger hadn't riled the creature to the point of transformation yet, but Connors was increasingly struggling with its presence.